Last year, Final Fantasy XVI producer Naoki Yoshida told John Elker of the Washington Post, quote, "When you're thinking about the future of the Final Fantasy franchise, you have to aim at that generation of players that have never touched a Final Fantasy before. But I don't want you to think that I'm abandoning those veterans and fans of the series, because we're definitely not. We want to create something that everyone feels is epic." With that said, it is clear that Square Enix and Creative Business Unit 3 wanted Final Fantasy XVI to get Final Fantasy back in the conversation of the best video games of all time. Make it revolutionary and make it something that not just RPG fans want to play, but all gamers will talk about for generations, as they did with Final Fantasy VII back in 1997. To do this, they took direct inspiration from a modern action game masterpiece, God of War. They saw that George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones and HBO's TV adaptation was the pinnacle of fantasy storytelling in recent times. Recognizing its widespread popularity, this would inspire the groundwork of the dark fantasy story to complement their desire to go back to the Final Fantasy roots of Kingdoms and Crystals with less mecha. They brought on battle director Ryota Suzuki, who is responsible for the stylish and addictive combat of one of the best modern action games, Devil May Cry 5. Combine this with a team of Final Fantasy legends that worked on Final Fantasy XII and Tactics, as well as salvaging Final Fantasy XIV and making it the incredibly successful MMO that has been thriving for over a decade, and you get Final Fantasy XVI. And at its best, Final Fantasy XVI rises up to meet these great inspirations and even surpasses them for what are some of the greatest gaming experiences I've ever played. The highest quality production value, impossible scope and scale, brilliant writing married with an epic and beautiful soundtrack, perfectly casted performances, and very, very fun combat. But just like a roller coaster that has ups and downs, Final Fantasy XVI has some flaws that are difficult to overlook and keep this from being a perfect thrill ride of a game. I'm going to talk about that in this very extensive review. A Final Fan TV review is made up of 5 pillars: story, gameplay, audio, visuals, and lasting appeal. We'll start with story, but fear not, I will not be talking about any spoilers right now. I am planning a full spoiler cast later this month though, so look forward to that. Story. Leading up to release, there were those who were saying, this isn't Final Fantasy anymore, it's just Game of Thrones. Well, let me tell you this. Final Fantasy XVI is about overcoming adversity and tragedy through the love of family, friends, and community. If that ain't Final Fantasy, I don't know what is. And without diving into my own personal stuff here, this is why Final Fantasy has meant so much to me and always resonates to the very core. 16's story is Final Fantasy, and I truly believe that all the naysayers will agree once they give it a shot. The core theme of Final Fantasy XVI is free will, the choice to live and die on your own terms, the choice to fight back against those who would take it away. It is prevalent through complex topics such as slavery, war and politics, the misuse of power, the mistreatment of Earth's resources. I can't dive into details about how the characters and how they tether to the theme of free will without spoilers, so I'll just say, trust me, the writing is superb for the main cast as well as many surprisingly memorable supporting characters. Some of the best quotes, or rather best life lessons, come from the most unpredictable of sources. The reflection of our lives and real-world society is on display, and it can be eye-opening, but make you feel inspired and hopeful. but for a game that centers around the theme of free will and choice. The player is not given much of a say in how they want to experience this journey. And by the way, this will be a common critique throughout the review. There is no dialogue trees or choices in how Clive will respond except for literally one option on recruiting a hideaway member. It doesn't really bother me much because I do enjoy allowing a story to be told as intended without me interfering, but I do think some light narrative choices would have only served to complement the theme of free will and choice. The most substantial choice the player has is whether or not they want to do the side quests. And that brings me to the topic of story pacing. Since 16 was marketed towards fans of big budget action games, I would recommend to anyone who has never played a Final Fantasy, an RPG, or in particular the MMO Final Fantasy XIV, and or mainly just play action games, to focus on the main story quest the first time you play. If you find yourself immersed in the world of Valisthea and yearn to know more about its history, do all of the side quests on your second playthrough. Read all of the tomes by Harpocrates. This content is there for these players who get so invested and want to just live in this world. But with that said, unfortunately, the side quests were hit or miss. Final Fantasy XIV fans will feel right at home with the MMO style of these quests, which can be taken as a positive or negative. Go here, kill a bunch of monsters, get these supplies, report back when done, maybe pluck a flower or two while you're at it. They did serve the world building quite well by giving you a better sense of what is happening on the ground level with the citizens of each realm. After all, you are on a quest to take away something that the people have relied on for centuries. Imagine having all of the things that use electricity, or for a better parallel, anything that uses oil just taken away from you. These people's lives, these people's way of life could be completely altered by your actions, and it's pretty cool to see how it is affecting them if you choose to do their side quests. You get back what you put in, sort of deal. So even if you plan on taking my advice and not doing the side quests for the more exciting experience, if you find yourself growing attached to characters or want to find out more about them, just please do their side quests, if only just their quests. Some were so satisfying that I would say they are essential, must-play quests. But yeah, some I started speed reading the dialogue before the voice actor could get it out and just skipping through the lines. I almost was very tempted to just skip the whole scene together. It surely didn't help that these scenes are mostly done with robotic animation and awkward lip flaps that clash so hard with the insane level of production quality that the main quests get. Sticking to the main quest, they will take you on a white-knuckle roller coaster ride as advertised. Doing side quests will have you riding the best roller coaster in the world, but also mimics the theme park experiences of waiting in line to get on one. Final Fantasy XVI is very cutscene heavy. It begins as an interactive episode of Game of Thrones, which I say as a major compliment, lest we forget that Game of Thrones' first 4 seasons are some of the best storytelling in television. Final Fantasy XVI meets that standard, and the mature rating actually fits very well in a Final Fantasy, because Final Fantasy has always been very mature rated, but able to get away with it with their pixels and low poly graphics. Final Fantasy VII Remake is a true example of the teen rating suppressing it. But the story does get very distinctly Final Fantasy just a few hours in. It gets so Final Fantasy. The opening 5 hours of Final Fantasy XVI does what every great story and every great Final Fantasy has done. It lays the groundwork for everything you need to know about the story in the most exciting and interesting way. It is no wonder that it was chosen as the section in the demo for people to get their hands on and play and then carry their save data over. So if you haven't played the demo and you're watching this review, go play the demo. It's free. Download it. It's awesome. If you don't have a PS5 and you're wondering if this is a system seller, keep on watching. The story is constantly throwing new mysteries at you. You think you figured it out? The game answers almost immediately. Good. But why were you right or wrong? The game intends to continually dive deeper into the enigma in ways that you may have not seen coming or had time to think about.
Do you know the tale of the blind men and the adamantus? One can often be led astray by focusing too closely on individual details. One must instead see the bigger picture.
These revelations happen so fast that it feels a bit rushed on my initial playthrough, but it's likely due to my adrenaline of needing to know and wanting to know that I could not put the controller down for hours and hours and binge playing this game every night. Active time lore is certainly a blessing from the developers, but I wonder if perhaps there is a bit too much of a reliance on it and the lore master Harpocrates, who will collect all of these ATL blurbs into one place so you don't have to pause the game in cutscenes if you don't want to and not have to fear on missing out on anything. Because I consumed everything that this game had to offer on my first run, I suppose there's no way of really knowing if ignoring all of this would have been fine for someone who's just looking to get the surface level of the story. I took a poll on Twitter, and the results varied, but here they are. But I am so incredibly grateful that this wealth of information is right there in-game. No Ultimania required. For lore enthusiasts like me, I cannot speak more highly of this feature. It is incredible. Imagine reading Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings, and whenever a location, name, or event comes up, you immediately have access to a live encyclopedia that will tell you all you need to know in the moment. It constantly updates as things happen too. Final Fantasy XVI is so rich with history that ATL and the tomes are a dream. There's also a scholar named Vivian Ninetails who can fill Clive in on the state of the realm, and it's speaks to me. I love it when she breaks down the happenings over the map with a play-by-play commentary. So cool. And these moments are part of the main story. So again, perhaps, someone playing without reading the ATL and not doing the side quest will still have a good grasp on things after all. She also provides this character relationship web with Clive at the center, so you can easily track who's family, who are lovers, who are enemies, and who's who. Points to the visuals category for making this all wonderfully presented and easy to navigate. You play as Clive, and even though the story is heavily focused on him, I do really appreciate that the cutscenes will show us moments happening elsewhere in Valisthea, allowing the player to understand what the ambitions of the other characters are and how their past intertwine with others. Again, I'm eager to talk about how these character choices complement the themes in fantastic ways. I just wish that the Dominants had more screen time, as they have very, very interesting backstories and ambitions. Sidolphus Telamon may just be top 3 best Cids in the series. Scratch that, it's between him and Cid Highwind, and to tell you the truth, I think Cid Telamon might just go down in the books as the best Cid. Not only is he perfectly casted with Ralph Ineson, but this Cid is the backbone of the entire story. I knew going into Final Fantasy XVI that this was going to be a dark fantasy without much room for comedic relief, and this was the case for most of the game. But it is certainly not without moments where I smiled or laughed. I exhaled heavily out of my nose a few times. The back and forth between Cid and Clive is perfect.
I think we're gonna need a bigger sword.
Mine's bigger.
Thank you, Clive, but I meant that figuratively. Get dressed. pretty as you are, you're not my type. Life's too short for a perfect plan. You want a plan that'll keep you on your toes, stop you growing old and complacent.
Worked for you, has it?
And not just throwaway punchlines either. The way that the writing team circled back on them for an even better payoff is special and happens a lot in the story. Something you should really look forward to when you play. There was one line from Harpocrates that is just absolutely... It had me laughing so hard that I put the controller down for a moment. And I couldn't compose myself. It was so unexpected, and I'm not even sure it was intended. It just had to have been intended, right? Like Michael Christopher Koji Fox, the localization director. Was it intended? Please tell me. I'll add the clip to the end of this video just in case if this is kind of considered a spoiler, because I really do want you to experience it real time in the game as it happens. But yeah, I kind of wish Harpocrates would have kept this oblivious to what he's saying comedic trait for more of the game, but he's still a top favorite character of mine regardless. Another of my favorite characters in this game, speaking of comedic relief, is Byron. His feel-good attitude shines all the more brighter in contrast to the bleak world. He's a breath of fresh air, but he's not just comedic relief. His introduction is one of the most heartfelt scenes of the game, so hopefully I've painted a picture for you that shows that yes, Final Fantasy XVI is one of the darkest entries in the series, and it takes itself seriously, but there's also rays of light. I'd compare the tone of the storytelling to that of Final Fantasy II, 12, and Tactics. I've said for years, ever since that trailer where Jill shouts, "It is you who shall bow to me," that it was the most hyped quote of all the trailers. The moment when she says it in the game didn't quite land as impactful as I hoped, but it was still a very good moment. The reason being, without any spoilers, was that I really wish that they would have shown us more of her history through flashbacks, as we only really had information to piece together to understand the true significance of that line, the true weight. There's a lot of weight behind that line. Even with that said, the dynamic of Jill and Clive is one of my favorite things about this story and in all of Final Fantasy. So let's talk about the villain, who shall not be named here. Not a Sephiroth or Kefka or Arden by any level, but it's just that this villain was outclassed by more interesting and exciting adversaries throughout the game. Let's hold off on spoilers in the comments of this video and then just unleash them on me when we do the spoiler cast next time. To conclude the category of story, the cinematography of the cutscenes and performance capture and voice work from the actors is some of the best I've seen in gaming, right up there with The Last of Us. Final Fantasy XVI is comfortable with letting a scene breathe and allows for nuanced drama and tension. It also puts on a spectacle unlike anything you've ever seen. It may be a cutscene heavy game, but you won't mind at all. Jesus, that was 20 minutes for freaking story. Gameplay. Final Fantasy XVI is a Final Fantasy that is so in love with its combat that it bases pretty much all of its gameplay around it. Meaning, Final Fantasy staples like minigames are now simply combat challenge arenas or setting high scores with combo chaining. A hunt board to defeat strong enemies. So don't expect, to snowboard or pop balloons while riding your chocobo. Personally, I wasn't too let down by this. But it is hard to deny that a playing card game, or even, medieval tournaments in a medieval Europe-inspired setting would have been a great way to add variety, especially when you think about the wonders it could have done for the side quests. So, is combat fun enough to be the focal point of the gameplay? It's a lot of fun. Final Fantasy XVI has a very timely-based battle system. It's all about precise evasions and combos, and it's insanely fun to find the rhythm and do the dance, baby. I'm not as addicted to the combat as I was with Final Fantasy VII Remake. I think I have figured out why. And it comes down to the strategic depth and menu management. Being able to reset abilities to try out different ones certainly made the first playthrough exciting and allowed me to spend time setting up abilities for particular hunts when necessary, when I was going against, a hunt that was like 10 levels higher than I was. So I needed to think about it a little bit. But truthfully, it wasn't always needed. There's iconic abilities that focus groups or a singular enemy. And that's pretty much the strategy. Now, for those who have taken the combat to a higher level with juggling and combo chaining, 16's combat is a playground. I've seen some pretty cool things that even after 65 hours, I didn't even know were possible. This is where the customization comes in. This is where the fun comes in. It's not about knowing thy enemy and planning accordingly, but rather finding an ability set that really scores a smokin' sexy style. That's a Devil May Cry reference. That's not in Final Fantasy XVI. Even so, I didn't spend too much time in the menus of Final Fantasy XVI, which may come as a shock to some Final Fantasy fans. Also a shock to me was the absence of status ailments to contend with. The Morbol's infamous status-inducing bad breath attack simply incapacitated Clive for a brief moment. Nothing else. No persistent poison damage, no confusion, nothing. And lastly, for a game that features an icon for each element, there weren't any elemental strengths and weaknesses to prepare for. The other form of combat is fighting against other unbelievably massive icons in the most epic kaiju meets Dragon Ball Z battles. Great Grieger's teats, did they deliver? Controlling the icon through these sequences wasn't necessarily revolutionary, but it didn't need to be. It just needed to be good enough to not get in the way while allowing you to control some of gaming's finest technical achievements. Let's talk about the difficulty of Final Fantasy XVI. The standard mode required for everyone to play and beat before unlocking the more challenging Final Fantasy mode is just challenging enough to keep the player engaged at all times. Thankfully, you can't just hack and slash and mash square to victory. That's not going to happen. Precision dodging is key. It's not Dark Souls level of timing. It's actually pretty generous with the window of evasion, and even that can be upgraded to make it easier to evade. The Rings of Accessibility do provide a great option for players new to action games. My wife was able to feel comfortable with playing the game due to these training wheels like the Ring of Timely Evasion, which slowed down time, allowing her to press R1 to evade right before being hit. It is possible to miss these opportunities as they are kind of quick and still take a hit every now and then, so it doesn't make it super easy. But there are more accessories that you can equip to make it as easy as holding the controller with one hand. Think of the rings as training wheels. Enjoy the ride however you like, and eventually, you may feel the desire to take them off, just as my wife did, when she felt comfortable enough with the combat system. So I would say that they serve their purpose well in that regard, and if you are new to action games, this will ease you right in, and it's perfectly done. But honestly, Final Fantasy XVI wasn't really marketed towards that. Yes, they focused heavily on these rings to let you know that you can play it, but it was marketed towards modern action gamers. And again, for a game that is themed around free will and choice, there is no choice to up the difficulty for those looking to match the struggle the characters are feeling in the story with each encounter. For example, Star Wars Jedi Survivor was way too easy on normal mode. I was just slashing my way through everything. Bumping the difficulty up made me feel more like a Jedi. It forced me to use my skills defensively rather than with aggression like a Sith would. I felt more connected to the story and to the main character Cal Kestis because of that harder difficulty. A tougher challenge in Final Fantasy XVI would have made me feel closer to Clive. Would have made me feel that no matter how many times I get a game over, my will remained not so easily broken. What Final Fantasy XVI aimed to do was for everyone who started the game to be able to roll credits. With that in mind, I'm sure everyone will see it through and still feel their time was well spent in the game. Only then will the game offer more difficulty modes, such as Final Fantasy mode, which will increase the amount of enemies attacking at one time, change up the enemy types as you play. Is definitely a more challenging experience, and honestly, I wish that was the experience I had on my first playthrough, and then allow me to unlock the hardest difficulty, the insane difficulty called Ultimaniac mode. And that is where the true test is. But that means you'll have to beat the game twice in order to unlock it. To match what is going on in the story, I think a party component of Final Fantasy DNA remains very important here. But there's no party management of equipment and abilities in Final Fantasy XVI. No sense of camaraderie on the battlefield either. They do occasionally team up with Clive's attacks, but there's nothing special about it in the way that Final Fantasy XV had special team-up animations to provide that sense of having a full party, even though you were only able to control the Noctis in that game at first. Something I really enjoyed was the hunts. They do not give you a precise location, just an approximate area, so you'll have to read a description to find the monsters using the clues given, making the hunts all the more intriguing to complete. The battles were a true showcase of how fun the combat system can be when matched against a challenging adversary. I would test my mettle against S-Class hunts just to feel that rush. There's also a photo mode, and for that I'm very grateful. Exploration. Big towns that feel lived in have been missing from Final Fantasy for quite some time now. Final Fantasy XVI delivers on this and fills each town with an interesting story and characters. Each town carries an importance to the story, and if you're into the side quests, you will be revisiting them frequently. We as gamers have gotten used to just running off and jumping off a balcony to the levels below, but 16 will not have Clive looking like a fool. You'll take the stairs like everyone else. And yeah, there's a jump button. It does nothing. The large open zones in each realm are connected, essentially making it an open world. If this is the style kept for future Final Fantasy games, such as Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which we saw has like a world map area there with 11,000 meters from point A to point B, you have to give me an incentive not to fast travel. Fill the world with fun chance encounters with or without you there to see it. That makes for fun stories to share with your friends. Or think of God of War Ragnarok, with more banter between the party members when exploring. God of War set the gold standard for how this should be done. Fast travel existed in that game, but I never wanted to use it because I didn't want to miss out on one of Mimir's stories or Freya asking Kratos about his past. And there are a few times when something would happen in a side quest of Final Fantasy XVI that I had hoped to hear what Jill's thoughts were on the situation. And it was something that surely would have clicked for her to comment on. And I think some Metroidvania elements would have fit perfectly with this, with Clive being able to unlock a new element every now and, throughout the entire story. Maybe you'd be able to unlock an area that was previously accessible, but you saw it earlier on in the game and like, wait a second, I got to come back to that later. I don't know, such as a dungeon. There's no secret dungeons in this game, no maze-like dungeons that require exploration and puzzle solving, and that was a bummer. I really wish they would have put these kinds of dungeons on the map, if only optional. Now here's the thing. I was very critical there. I wanted to apply some constructive criticism here, so that way, when Final Fantasy XVII hopefully builds on this solid foundation that 16 has set, that maybe they'll be able to take these constructive critiques and apply them to make the perfect Final Fantasy game. But as you can tell, there's a lot that could have been in Final Fantasy XVI. Audio. You've likely heard from the trailers the epic orchestral themes that are just so incredible. I love that Final Fantasy XVI has distinct themes that will play in battle. One for regular battles, one for mid-boss battles, and one for big boss battles. They get stuck in your head from not only repetition of battles, but because they are so catchy. Reminds me of the PlayStation 1 era of Final Fantasy battle music. Towns also have great music that feels like a throwback to classic Final Fantasy. Then there's surprises like the song that plays during the Titan Lost battle. And it's rare for a song to be considered a spoiler, but even to play a sample of it in this review would be a disservice. It is very, very Masayoshi Soken if you are familiar with his previous work. And there is a song featuring English vocals that is powerful. And it brought tears to my eyes, man. It ranks right up there with Final Fantasy VIII's Eyes on Me. I just don't have any criticisms on the soundtrack. It's beautiful, it is intense, it is fun, it is otherworldly, it rocks. It's everything it needs to be when the story calls for it. There are some moments when the music kind of kicks in suddenly. There's an example of this right at the beginning of the demo section when the camera pans up to the Dragoon posing. Epic moment, by the way. But it's quiet when it pans up and then like it just kicks in. What is odd that I can't decide whether or not I like it. It definitely makes the theme stand out even more and sort of gives off this vibe of classic Final Fantasy battle themes. And as excellent as the sound effects are, they actually drown out Soken-san's amazing work, and it wouldn't be a bad idea to turn down the sound effects to about 75 or 60% in the options menu. Or not. You have the free will to do as you please. What I think was especially awesome was how the haptic feedback is tied in directly to the game's sound. It feels like holding a mini subwoofer in your hands. It's some of the best implementations of the DualSense haptics since Astrobot's Playroom. While on the topic of the DualSense, when playing without headphones, the speaker will give you audio clues when the abilities are ready and play sounds of Torgal barking. I do like these features of the DualSense being utilized. Adaptive triggers are also there, but they're limited to just opening gates with a tighter pull of R2. It's nothing special, but it's there. Ben Starr, the voice of Clive Rosfeld, embodies a wide range of emotions throughout Final Fantasy XVI. We get Clive as a teenager who, although must deal with the unfortunate hand he was dealt at birth, but he's still good-spirited and has aspirations. This is conveyed wonderfully through Starr's soft-spoken yet upbeat voice, which is a stark contrast to the broken man he becomes after a great tragedy befell him and his family, which Starr changes his tone to grizzled and outspoken. Clive will grow and change throughout this game's story, and I praise Ben Starr's ability to constantly adapt and personify this aspect in his performance, and I'm sure was recorded erratically by jumping around from teenage to 20s to 30s. That could not have been easy. So well done, Ben Starr. As much as I want to leave it as, you know what, the entire cast delivers, I just got to. It's difficult not to mention Ralph Ineson, who has cemented his place as a fan favorite for his performance as Sidolphus Telemann. This cast is one of the best, if not the best, in the entire series. Nina Indus as Benedicta gets an applause from me for a few particular scenes in which she pours her heart out. Alex Lanapekin as Titan's dominant Hugo Kupka is so good that his character is my favorite antagonist in the game. He brings an unmatched level of intensity and layers of emotions to this performance. Dion Lesage, dominant of Bahamut, was not shown much in the trailers, so I was eagerly anticipating his appearance in this game, and wow. Stuart Clark gives us a performance that could just belong as a main cast member of Game of Thrones. Put him on House of the Dragon. David Menken told us to expect a little bit a healthy fear from his character Barnabas Tharm. And by the flames, he wasn't wrong. As I said at the top of this review and under the story category, Jill Warwick is now one of my favorite characters in the series, and credit, of course, goes to the writing team, but equally so to the amazing job that Susanna Fielding did. I want to shout out all the actors, such as Charlotte McBurney and Logan Hannon, who played young Jill and Joshua respectively, and other outstanding cast members that would otherwise be considered as spoilers, but that's how great this cast is. I felt the need to highlight each and every one of the main casts for their incredible work, and I still feel like I'm shortchanging the rest of this fantastically voiced game. The quality of talent is consistent across the board for Final Fantasy XVI, and it feels so good to have some of the best acting in video games right here in Final Fantasy. Visuals. Final Fantasy XVI features stunning vistas that will have your thumb resting on the share button ready to snap that screenshot. The art direction is on a whole nother level, and it screams Final Fantasy. In the earlier entries of the series, there are locations known as the Crystal Shrines, and we could only imagine the full splendor of what such a thing would look like in real life. Well, Final Fantasy XVI's mother crystals, and within them, are an absolutely breathtaking sight to behold. Final Fantasy XVI continues to honor the legacy of Final Fantasy with an area inside of a volcano that is such a callback to the first entry's Mount Gulg location. The high fantasy castles that silhouette the horizon are freaking postcard worthy. The locales are diverse with the aforementioned locations, but I also have to spotlight the forest areas because it captures the feeling of a nature walk so well. And Dalmekia brings in South Asian culture, while Volud provides Middle Ages Scandinavian-inspired landscapes and towns. And of course, the mysterious ruins of the ancient fallen civilization are wonderfully ominous. The art of the world map is so good. It's almost like a tilt-shift art style when you bring up the world map, and it really makes Valisthea feel as important as any other piece of the story. I played this game on graphics mode the entire adventure. Final Fantasy XVI's world is just too beautiful to have performance mode chop down the resolution. Besides, the game seemed to be at its most stable on graphics mode in 30 frames per second and not the targeted 60 frames per second that performance mode attempts to offer. I noticed very, very little slowdown in my game. I have heard from some and read comments about performance mode not meeting expectations, but I personally recommend graphics mode anyways. As always, Digital Foundry is the place to go for the technical details, but they did praise Final Fantasy XVI for being a remarkably polished game at launch. Watch their full video for more on that. There's no mini-map option anywhere in the game. Now, I'm fine without one, as it would have, it just really immerses me in the exploration if that is what the game wanted to achieve. But it's obviously counting on you to bring up the map frequently to find the desired destination. Shoot, I'd settle for a compass. So when I brought up the map, charted my course, and returned to the game, I wouldn't have to think to myself, wait, which way was I facing? Time to bring up the map again. The enemy slain screen, it kind of pops up a little early in my opinion and kind of removes me from the intensity of the action on screen. I think it would have been much better served later on after the battle, maybe after the cutscene, but it does allow for a method of surprise when you think you're done with the battle, but there's more. During the PAX East panel in Boston, Yoshida-san presented 4 main components of Final Fantasy XVI, and one of which was visuals. They wanted to make sure Final Fantasy XVI was cutting edge in this department and a true showcase of the PlayStation 5's power. So, it is time for the main event of the game. The icon battles are a visual treat of scale and special effects. I played this game late at night. When everyone is in bed, it was just me in my living room. Got my headphones on. There's no one here. There's no one. You don't talk to yourself when there's no one around. But let me tell you, I'm not exaggerating. When I just involuntary lit out this game is freaking awesome. This is freaking awesome. I couldn't help myself. When Final Fantasy XVI crests the lift hill of the coaster and you grip the controller tight and go for the ride, God of War comes to mind for the sense of scale. But the wild part is Final Fantasy XVI does it better than the modern God of War games. Think more of like God of War 3, but it's jacked up on Mountain Dew. And that is what Final Fantasy XVI is during these moments. And there's even options to get back in line and ride it again at any point once you completed the stage through the stage replay and arcade modes. I found myself replaying them quite a bit. This is how you showcase the power of the PlayStation 5 whenever you have guests over. It's always accessible after you complete each stage in the story. During these sequences, Final Fantasy XVI is one of the most visually impressive games ever. Lasting appeal. A patch just released this week, which I will display the full notes on screen now, fixing some major talking points of this review that I have happily edited out. So clearly, the team is listening. Hopefully that means that other quality of life improvements will be coming, such as letting us have the free will to sprint at will. Enhance the photo mode before they even think to hold a photo mode contest like Final Fantasy VII Remake did. I believe Final Fantasy XVI should be supported with DLC, if not just to remind players the true GOTY near the end of the year when it's time to vote, but it would be awesome if they were to add in complex dungeons and super bosses. Open up new areas of the maps that were not explored in the base game. And if I were to get just completely wild with this, give us some multiplayer, maybe some competitive PvP, since this is an action-focused game. That would be cool. All right, let me dial it back. I'm going to die. Don't laugh at me, though. Okay, Final Fantasy 15 had comrades. All right, but give us a minigame, please. This would not only extend the lasting appeal, but also significantly improve the overall gameplay experience. I don't necessarily want story-based DLC, as it was expressed by the development team that Final Fantasy XVI is meant to be a complete story. So anything else will feel like they didn't fully believe in their own vision. But I do love these characters in this world. So I mean, I wouldn't say no. More on that topic in the spoilercast. I think this will be many players' first Final Fantasy, and for that reason, it will probably be their all-time favorite Final Fantasy for years to come. I think die-hard fans of the series will be somewhat split. For a few fans, Final Fantasy XVI will be missing a few key components that define what Final Fantasy means to them. For a majority of fans, especially fans of Final Fantasy XIV, this game will easily crack their top 3 or top 5. As for me, I believe this is a Final Fantasy that will definitely benefit from another playthrough, especially on the more challenging difficulties offered in the New Game Plus modes. The level cap increases from 50 to 99, and you get to enhance your equipment that wasn't possible on the first playthrough. Suzuki-san said that the design philosophy was to have the player learning the ropes on the first playthrough, then Final Fantasy and Ultimaniac modes are when they take what they've learned and put their skills to the test. Enemies will attack Clive simultaneously, apply pressure that makes you feel like a game over is always around the corner. For me, I spent my first playthrough consuming everything that this game wanted to offer me. This time, the pacing will be much better, as I'll stick to the main story quest and do only the side quests I know are too good to pass up. This playthrough, and all playthroughs to follow, will confirm that Final Fantasy XVI is a top-tier Final Fantasy. Ever since I completed Final Fantasy XVI, it has been on my mind. The fact that it has stayed with me and left such an impact on me is certainly the mark of an amazing game, and exactly what a Final Fantasy does. I love this game so much, and I'm so happy to say that it matched my intense levels of hype. It matched the warrior of hype's expectations. There are some things, though, that I was let down by, but I do believe that this is the future of Final Fantasy. To keep this momentum going, I would love for Square Enix to let Creative Business Unit 3 continue to cook, evolve, and iterate upon this formula, and perhaps taking some of my constructive criticism into consideration to get a much faster turnaround on a Final Fantasy XVII. Because what a game. What a freaking game. I hope you enjoyed this review, that I am well aware this was too much. 14 pages in a Google document? But if there's anything I want you to take away from this, is that I didn't have to write 14 pages. Lord knows the review video 2 weeks after a game comes out, that's probably going to be like 30 to 45, maybe even an hour long. It's not going to do well in views. But that's where I want you to take away from this. I want you to take away from this. I didn't have to, but I felt I just needed to. I needed to talk about it. I wanted to talk about it. There's a hurricane of emotions that have stirred within me since rolling the credits. What Final Fantasy XVI has done for Final Fantasy is so special. To close out this review, Final Fantasy XVI's story at base level is intense, emotional, and inspiring, and for those who wish to devote the time reading the tomes and put in the busy work to dig deeper into the lore of this world, there is a mithril mine of content waiting for them. 16's gameplay is lacking in some important things that make perfection just slightly out of reach, but what it does offer is a paradise for action gamers, especially on the second and third playthrough. Masayoshi Soken's triumphantly carries the torch that the legendary Final Fantasy composer Nobuo Uematsu passed on to him. Final Fantasy XVI's stages are a true showcase of the PlayStation 5's power and provide some of gaming's best action set pieces. It feels so good to see so many new faces in this fandom that will become just as passionate about Final Fantasy as we all are because of this game. Final Fantasy XVI is truly a game that everyone will feel is epic. Thanks for watching. Take care now. Bye-bye then. Also, Clive is the most thankful protagonist ever.
Thank you. I think. Thank you. And thank you again. I'll take that as a thank you. Thank you all the same. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Blackthorn. Thank you, Lubor. Thank you, Hippocrates. Thank you, Obolus. Thank you, Goots. Thank you, Otto. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Karen.
Thank me? Thank your dog.
Thank you, Torgal.